"What the hell are you doing?" the court clerk screamed hoarsely, but it was too late. A sharp pop cut through the courtroom like a blade, a purple goo electric arc tearing through the air, piercing straight through the wooden table. Judge Violet Johnson, the scale of justice with dark skin, was thrown back, her body jerking like a puppet, convulsing. Officer Daniel Brooks smirked with vile satisfaction. This black woman could do nothing when the corrupt system had his back, but he didn't know the camera was rolling, its light exposing the dark corners. Violet would crush the rotten system he relied on. "What state are you in? Got any cops like this scumbag Daniel Brooke?" The morning session in courtroom number 4 began with an inexplicable silence. Ceiling fans rotated steadily above the aged wooden ceiling, the soft rustle of turning papers echoing among the fully occupied rows of seats. Reporters, court staff, prosecutors, and uniformed officers sat upright, appearing as if attending a routine hearing, yet their eyes betrayed nothing ordinary. Almost all were fixed on the high chair at the center, where a woman silently reviewed the file before her without looking up. Judge Violet Johnson neither posed with authority nor gave an opening statement. Her gray hair was neatly tied at the nape, the discreet dark blue suit matched her unadorned face, but her gaze commanded the courtroom into automatic order. Nearly 30 years in the judiciary had exposed her to countless distrustful looks and repeated questioning over her inflexible decisions against police misconduct. Yet she never yielded. Known by many as the silent keeper of the scales, this nickname followed her through rulings that shook the city's police force internally. Violet never appeared on television, nor consented to any profiles, but her presence always forced both prosecution and police to adjust their strategies. Those abusing power knew they could not fool her with polished reports or excuses. She trusted no expression but read every word in the files, recalling details lawyers from both sides deliberately glossed over. Today's hearing concerned a young black teenager who was forcibly restrained by police while walking home from tutoring. According to testimony, he had not caused trouble or resisted but was still pushed to the ground, handcuffed, and detained for 7 hours before a lawyer could reach him. No weapon was found, no search warrant existed, no direct evidence accused. The issue was not the severity of the case, but the person who took the action, Officer Daniel Brooke, frequently named in internal reports for excessive use of force. Violet closed the file and lifted her gaze, scanning the rows before settling just as a police officer in his 40s glared at her with clear displeasure. He quickly turned away. Several others shifted subtly, creating a silent but distinct chain reaction. Something was restrained, not by the case details but by the person presiding. From the rear side door, Daniel Brooke entered, his uniform freshly pressed, shoes polished meticulously, belt badge aligned perfectly. He walked straight ahead, eyes not meeting anyone, his stride decisive as one unaccustomed to interrogation. The atmosphere shifted, as if a thin chill ran down the spines of the observers. One seated officer tilted his head toward Daniel, exchanged a quick glance, then returned to his seat. Violet did not react, but she saw it, and took note. The hearing had yet to start, but a familiar scent filled the air. The scent of contempt. The scent of those believing themselves above control. The scent of silence long held, ready to shatter. Daniel took the witness stand with a rigid gait, standing tall as if on parade, eyes scanning the audience with the habitual control of one used to command. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a sharp jaw and short-cropped hair, his face showed little expression, yet his eyes remained alert, assessing who was worthy of attention. Daniel's files had appeared in many internal investigations, mostly related to heavy-handed suppression or exceeding limits during arrests. Yet each time he escaped discipline, citing familiar reasons: lack of direct evidence, unidentified witnesses, or unexpected stressful situations. Internally, Daniel was praised as the one who dares when others hesitate. This was how men like him were protected, sometimes even praised. in a system favoring obedience over truth. Violet made no notes as Daniel took his place, but her eyes rose exactly as he placed his hands on the table. They looked at each other for several seconds. No words were exchanged, no obvious gesture made, but the atmosphere thickened. It felt as though an invisible glass stretched between them, tense with history, prejudice, and intertwined power. "You were present at the scene on the 4th of last month?" Violet asked in an even, clear tone. Daniel nodded, answering each word crisply, his voice cold and mechanical. "I received a report of suspicious behavior. The subject did not stop when requested. I applied restraint measures." Violet looked down at the papers. "According to the recording, the subject was blocked and thrown down before reacting. What do you say about that?" Daniel tilted his head slightly, glanced at the prosecutor, then back. "Some footage doesn't show the full picture. The threat lies in attitude, in the eyes, in potential non-cooperation." Below, a few people shifted quietly in their seats. The prosecutor crossed arms without interrupting. The defendant, a black teenager sitting beside his lawyer, stared unblinking at Daniel. No one spoke, but all understood this was no ordinary questioning. It was a test of two powers, one wielding a gun, the other holding legal authority. "The scene report you submitted was last amended after completion," Violet said without looking up. "The description, including signs of a weapon concealed in clothing, was added after the initial submission." Daniel squinted, pursed his lips, then spoke with visible irritation. "I supplemented based on memory, not altering the case's nature." Violet raised her head. "The nature you speak of is exactly what I am clarifying." Daniel raised his hand as if to interrupt, but she continued without waiting. "I'm not asking for your defense. I'm asking to see how far justice has been trampled." The courtroom seemed to freeze. A sudden silence enveloped the room. Nobody stirred. Daniel looked straight ahead, but his eyes no longer glittered with the confidence from when he entered. Below, some bowed heads took notes. Others quietly twirled pens. Violet folded the file. No more words were needed. The confrontation had begun, and the line was clear. Daniel stood motionless on the witness stand, though he could not hide the slight movement in his right hand. His knuckles tightened and loosened repeatedly. His gaze shifted away from Violet and gradually focused on the defendant, the teenager bowing his head before his lawyer. The heavy silence continued to press down on the courtroom after Violet's last question. On the left side of the room, a group of officers began acting strangely. They leaned toward each other more than necessary, exchanging brief words most people pretended not to hear. Violet turned a page of her notes, her voice steady and clear. "Based on the false testimony and signs of protocol violations and the use of force, I recommend initiating a criminal investigation against the officer on duty that day." The statement ended with the scratching sound of a pen marking the record. Though brief, it was like throwing a spark onto dry embers. Daniel stepped fully down from the stand, his eyes fixed on the central table. His voice grew harsher, tinged with impatience, barely concealed. "I have something to add and clarify right here." Before Violet could respond, he moved close to the edge of the table. His posture was not like someone requesting permission to speak, but like a man waiting for a reaction. No one expected his next move. Daniel reached behind his back and pulled a small metallic device from his belt pouch. "What are you doing?" The court clerk's voice rang out, but it was too late. A sharp pop sounded, then a blue-purple electric arc shot across the wooden table. Violet's body jerked violently as if thrown off her chair. Her hands curled midair, her eyes rolled back before she collapsed onto the hard floor. Everything happened too fast for anyone to react in time. Someone shouted. Chairs in the back began shifting. A police officer stood abruptly, but before drawing his gun, another officer grabbed him. In an instant, the courtroom fractured into multiple currents of panic, suspicion, and stunned silence. Daniel did not flee nor draw more weapons. He just stood there, breathing heavily, eyes wide, staring at where Violet lay curled up on the floor. Attorney Marcus Reed rushed in from the side door, arm raised, commanding emergency aid. "Call an ambulance, secure the scene, document everything urgently," he shouted. his voice as firm as a military order. No one among the court security dared approach Daniel now. They formed a cluster, their eyes flickering as if waiting for another command. A young woman from the audience rushed forward with a first aid kit, but was stopped by an officer. In the chaos, the disorder of authority was clear. No one knew whom to obey, and no one dared handcuff an officer who had just used violence openly before the entire justice system. Violet remained motionless, her eyes not fully closed, fingers trembling slightly, and the entire room sank into a silence of a different kind. A silence not born of respect, but of fear and shame, not because one had been defeated, but because it happened in a place deemed inviolable by law. The ambulance arrived in less than 10 minutes, but by then the courtroom seemed dissolved. Those remaining avoided eye contact. Some bowed their heads, clutching their foreheads. Others hurried out, pale-faced. Violet was carried out on a stretcher, face ashen, wrists still twitching slightly. The legal assistant accompanying her clutched documents tightly against her chest, eyes red but tears withheld. Daniel stood near the side door, held by 2 officers at an unmarked spot. No one handcuffed him, nor ordered an immediate arrest. One officer clicked his tongue, instructing another to note in the log, "Temporary detainment for testimony collection per protocol," his handwriting shaky as if fearing that a single wrong word could become a threat. Attorney Marcus Reed entered, walking briskly but not hastily. He glanced over Violet's condition, then turned to order court staff to seal off the courtroom, forbid image leaks, and urgently document every action. He demanded everyone remain to give statements on site. Some officers frowned, hesitant before orders from someone outside their direct command. Marcus did not wait for a response. He stared at each person, beginning to call out the names of officers near the incident site. No one objected aloud, but everyone understood this situation had gone beyond the usual bounds. The judge was felled by an officer in the very place she held the scales of justice. Such a thing could not be justified by internal rules. In the far corner of the room, one person had yet to leave. A freelance reporter who often observed civil trials sat alone, head bowed over her phone. Her fingers swiped continuously without typing. She took no notes, looked at no one. When everyone hurriedly dispersed, she stood, slipped the phone into her coat pocket, then quietly exited through the back door. That night, a little-known investigative blog account unexpectedly received an anonymous video clip, 10 seconds long, shot from the left side rows, close to the back wall of the courtroom. The image was clear and steady, capturing the exact moment Daniel Brooke reached behind to pull out a taser and fired it at Violet. The clip was silent, showing no face of the filmer, but every movement was precise, as if premeditated. The blog account manager watched the clip repeatedly. He knew what he held could burn down an entire system. The issue was not just violence, but violence from one representing the law, aimed at the keeper of justice. The video remained unpublished. He waited, not for money nor fame, simply because the time was not yet right. Before everything exploded, he needed to know who recorded it. The angle was too precise, the moment fully captured, not missing a beat. This meant the filmer was not accidental. They sat exactly where planned, adjusted the frame at the right moment, holding the camera steady as if trained. Where was that person? And the ultimate purpose was not just recording, but to exert pressure. The video in his hands was not evidence, but leverage, waiting for the right time and direction to detonate. Mia Carter woke as the early morning light barely spilled through the dust-covered window. She lived alone in a small apartment on the 3rd floor of an old building near downtown. The coffee machine had been turned on since last night, the faint bitter aroma drifting from the kitchen corner. On the table lay an old laptop, its inbox already open like a familiar ritual. Every morning for Mia began like this, quiet, precise, and lonely enough that no one could intrude. Mia was in her 30s, once a key investigative reporter for a major newspaper, but was cut loose after persistently pursuing an inquiry involving staged crime scenes within the city's special task force. They told her she was too extreme, lacking balanced perspective. Other ways to suggest she should stay silent. She did not. She created her own site, investigating, writing, and publishing independently. Occasionally, people still trusted her enough to send information. That morning, an unassuming email subject appeared. Trial Day 4, full version, sent from an anonymous address, signed simply as N. Attached was an encrypted video file, nearly 500 MB, larger than any clip leaked before about the case. Mia sat upright, setting her coffee aside, launching the specialized decryption software she reserved for moments like this. The video began from the far left rear corner of the courtroom, the frame steady and clear down to every expression. It captured not only the moment Daniel Brooke tased Judge Violet Johnson, something the media had reported in fragmented clips, but also the moments before, Daniel glancing at another officer, giving a slight nod, then tightening his grip as if receiving a secret signal. Mia replayed that scene 4 times. Preparation, consensus, there was no doubt. It was not a loss of control, but a plan, and this video was the only proof. She stood, paced the room, turned on the fan, but her mind remained dense. Half of her urged immediate release of the video, forcing an explosion before it could be stifled. The other half knew that releasing it prematurely would lead to dismissal, the videographer hunted, and Mia herself targeted next. She had seen this game before, almost lost everything once, for missing one control step. Mia opened the encryption software, created 2 copies. One saved on an external drive, the other compressed and uploaded to a secondary storage account she used for sensitive documents. The draft article began, the opening line clear, a truth suffocated within the most sacred place of law. She wrote 4 paragraphs before stopping, her hand still on the keyboard, her gaze drifting elsewhere. She needed to know who sent it and why. If this was a message, it was incomplete. If a warning signal, the sender risked more than anyone else, and if someone was watching, then the game hadn't started. It had just opened its door. That afternoon, stepping off the bus, Mia sensed something was off. She knew every street near her home, every corner, every light, but a gray sedan had been parked across the street since morning, and this time it didn't move in the usual rhythm. The occupant remained inside, head bowed over a screen. As Mia approached, the car roared to life, turned sharply at the corner without looking back. By dusk, another car stopped opposite the apartment building, unfamiliar plate, lights off, but engine running. 3 times in one day was too much to call coincidence. Back in her apartment, Mia reopened her computer. A new anonymous email awaited in her inbox. No subject, no sender name. The message contained only 1 line, "Not your business." No signature, no attachments, but the spacing and pauses made Mia realize the sender was watching closely. She scanned the room again, then pulled the curtains tight. Every tiny detail now mattered. Mia activated traceback software to track the IP from the previous video. The system pinpointed 2 sources, one from a public network near the city courthouse, the other blurred behind multiple layers of servers. The sender knew what they were doing. They had knowledge, tools, and clearly intent. But the obscurity revealed one slip. The first transmission briefly located a signal near a parking lot reserved for judicial staff. She noted the location, marked it on the digital map, then sat silently, thinking. Something was moving beneath the surface of the Taser incident. This was no longer a spontaneous act, but part of an underground chain. If Mia released the video now, it could easily be refuted by fabricated evidence, or worse. She could be labeled a fraud and erased from media. What she needed was someone with legal credibility to turn the video into undeniable proof. Late that night, Mia called Marcus Reed. They met in a small cafe, a corner table in dim yellow light. She placed her laptop down, played the original video. Marcus said nothing for the first 2 minutes. When the clip ended, he exhaled and pulled out a notebook to mark the timestamps. "We can't release this yet," he said, eyes still fixed on the screen. "I'll use it to request a special investigation, but if it leaks early, they'll dismiss it from the start." Mia nodded. She didn't need praise. She needed protection. "I'll stay silent," she answered, voice low and steady, "but I've encrypted the video and saved it in 3 places. If anything happens to me, copies will automatically send to human rights organizations and all major news agencies." Marcus looked at her for the first time during the meeting, the gaze of someone who had endured too many failures trusting the wrong people. This time he was silent, as if agreeing without further words. Mia packed her laptop and left before him. Outside, the night cloaked the streets, but she knew the real shadow wasn't on the ground. It stood behind her, waiting for one slip to close in, and she was used to living with that pressure, one step, one breath at a time. On Monday morning, a press release from the city police department was posted on the official website and rapidly distributed to media outlets at a familiar pace. The announcement, less than 3 paragraphs long, was written in such a bureaucratic language that readers felt it had been recycled elsewhere. "Officer Daniel Brooke is currently suspended pending an internal investigation." The opening line passed like a rehearsed script that needed no edits. Not a single line mentioned the assault that occurred inside the courtroom. There was no reference to a taser, nor any mention that the victim was a sitting judge presiding over a trial. The phrase, "The incident occurred during the course of duty," was all the public received. By noon the same day, the city's largest television station devoted 42 seconds to read the press release verbatim. The anchor delivered the news quickly and without emotion, resembling a weather forecast. A scrawling caption ran beneath the screen stating, "Law enforcement officer suspended, details under review." There were no images, no witness interviews, and no indication that this case was the source of a severe shock to the legal system just 3 days prior. Viewers changed the channel, but the anger had already begun to spread. That afternoon, social media flooded with hashtags bearing the name Violet Johnson. Hundreds shared clips trimmed from an independent blog video, shortened but still capturing the electric shock, the fall, and the absolute silence engulfing the room considered the most sacred seat of justice. Public opinion started questioning the legality of the failure to prosecute immediately. Anonymous accounts, analysts, independent lawyers, and citizens who had suffered police abuse all spoke out. A young attorney posted a 2-page article explaining why Daniel's actions could not be justified as a response during duty. The article spread widely, attracting over 200,000 views overnight. The next day, a group of independent lawyers sent an open letter to the entire court system and judicial inspectorate offices. The letter did not call for protest, but demanded a public criminal investigation based on the video, witness testimonies, and the unique nature of the case. Attached was an initial forensic report on the video, confirming no edits or cuts, accompanied by an excerpt capturing the biological electrical signals reacting in the victim's body, a rare form of data only collectible via specialized court measurement devices. However, the system remained silent. The Department of Justice issued no comment. When questioned, the spokesperson for the Judicial Council refused to answer and abruptly ended the press conference. Meanwhile, the city police chief, who should have been the first to appear, was reported to be out of state and unable to participate in media responses. The mainstream media continued to avoid directly describing the incident. All official reactions revolved around a fixed phrase: "We are monitoring developments closely and will thoroughly review before making a final conclusion." This was the repeated line whenever the system chose silence, but this time the silence no longer created a vacuum of control. It was becoming a smoldering fire, gradually burning away trust and preparing for an unstoppable explosion. Soft light from the hospital window filtered through white curtains, spilling onto the gray-tiled floor. In a 6th-floor room, the steady beep of a heart monitor measured the cautious revival of someone who had just crossed a critical threshold between life and death. When Violet Johnson's eyes slowly opened, the nurse standing nearby held her breath for a long moment before bending down to grasp her hand. Eyes red and silent, Violet furrowed her brow, lips slightly moving. Then her first words came. "Has the trial ended?" Not "where am I?" nor "what happened to me." Violet did not need anyone to recount the events. She knew exactly how her body was reacting. The sharp jolts along her spine, the dull chest pain, and the stunned looks in others' eyes when she opened them. all confirmed what her memory had not yet named. When Marcus entered holding a thin file and an external hard drive, he did not ask about her health, nor did she need him to. They had worked together long enough to understand that silence sometimes meant respect. Violet motioned for the nurse to leave, then quietly focused on the screen Marcus handed her. The video, recorded from the left rear of the courtroom, showed every frame clearly. Violet watched herself fall, mouth agape in a moment of horror, body convulsing like a brutal punishment inflicted by the very person who was supposed to uphold the law. She did not blink nor turn away. When the screen went dark, she spoke firmly. "We will speak out." Marcus exhaled and placed a stack of printed public comments on the table. Articles, signatures, requests for investigation. Everything was ready except for a starting voice. Violet insisted on writing the first statement. She sat up slowly, hands still trembling, but eyes brightening. The first draft was penned in blue ink on plain white paper, free of excess detail or complaint. Not a single word recounted the pain. Not a line spoke of shock. She refused to be a victim. She chose to be the questioner. "We live in a system that only knows silence when it errs and screams when exposed," she wrote. The last sentence was triple underlined. "I do not need their apologies. I need them to face the truth, and to tremble as I did when shocked." Marcus sent the statement to Mia overnight. They began contacting the independent lawyers who had signed the open letter. Witness lists were reviewed, legal strategies designed to initiate federal lawsuits, bypassing local internal systems. Violet agreed to be the key witness, ready to appear publicly before the press, fully aware of the subsequent waves of threats and attacks. That afternoon, the nurse returned to find her struggling to stand beside the bed, gripping the rail tightly, her back still hunched from the trauma, yet her eyes did not shy away. That gaze, though it had survived electric shocks and threats, held an inexplicable quality, unwavering integrity. The silence of the system was about to confront its greatest fear, a survivor who refused to back down. 4 days after Violet regained consciousness, Marcus Reed spent an entire morning in the archive room of the Senior Lawyers Association. This was where copies of files, previously removed from the public system but not completely destroyed, were stored. He flipped through stacks of old documents, his eyes scanning hundreds of names and seemingly unrelated cases, yet each piece quietly fit together. A common denominator gradually emerged. Trials involving police officers accused of abuse of power often ended in unusual ways. Over the past 10 years, at least 3 trials were suspended midway with reasons recorded as loss of security control or unidentified internal threats. Coincidentally, all 3 courts involved lawsuits filed by civilians against police violence. The victims suffered injuries, lost their ability to work, or even lost loved ones, but the entire legal process ended abruptly with no conclusion reached. More notably, each case saw a special security supervision team dispatched to the court, not from the local judiciary, but an internal coordination group directly approved by the police department. Marcus checked the personnel list of this unit, and when cross-referencing special deployment records, he recognized a name that appeared most frequently: Gideon Reeves. Gideon was no stranger to law enforcement, but had never appeared in the press. He held the position of team leader, responsible for specialized security under sensitive conditions, a definition so broad it defied accountability. Among the 7 files Marcus gathered, 5 assignments bore Reeves' signature, all related to trials with negative police elements. Continuing his review, Marcus requested an archive staff member to provide copies of internal memorandums circulated under the name Special Situation Coordination Directives. Among dozens of stamped documents, one memo from 7 years ago caught his attention, longer than usual. The page, titled simply and unclassified, was signed and sealed by Gideon Reeves himself. The content was concise, without naming any case or specific individual, yet the central phrase, repeated 3 times, left Marcus stunned. Priority is to ensure developments remain within procedural control boundaries. At first glance, the phrase sounded like a routine order, but in the context of cases where it appeared, its true meaning became clearer. It was not an administrative directive, but a tacit reminder. Keep everything within permitted limits. Prevent facts from escaping the framework. Stop witnesses from speaking out, and block judges from stirring public opinion. The term procedural control had become a cover for many acts of suppressing dissent through power. Marcus carefully photocopied the memo, marked it in red, and wrote in the margin, "The only thing that exceeds the framework now is conscience." As he left the archive center, he was fully aware he had just touched a covert power current, not visible through weapons, but through cold, indifferent words capable of strangling truth if left in darkness. For 2 decades, the name Gideon Reeves had never appeared in the media but behind the justice system. He was known as the key holder of sensitive trials. No one knew when he was appointed, nor how much real power his title held. Reeves's list of titles stated he was a senior internal security coordinator, a seemingly administrative position, but in reality one empowered to intervene in personnel placement and shape handling scenarios when trials showed signs of disorder. Reeves was in his 60s, not tall but with sharp eyes. He graduated from the police academy, but had shifted entirely to backstage coordination, where a voice need not be raised for a trial to halt. Colleagues called him the gatekeeper of the system. He never attended press conferences, never revealed his photo on social media, and always entered through the back door. Rumors circulated that he once ordered a judge's suspension mid-trial with a 7-second phone call. Some internal reports mentioned Reeves during closed meetings. Some complained he often proposed stabilizing measures beyond normal legal procedures, a euphemism for using covert pressure, controlling witnesses, even intentional trial postponements. All complaints were cut off within the system, with no official investigations launched. Marcus knew Reeves was not alone. The network he operated required no written orders, no electronic records. They functioned by habit, tacit understanding and loyalty to the old order. Among trials influenced, 3 had Daniel Brooke deployed as security support. All deployment orders bore Reeves' significant signature. No single detail was enough to indict, but when pieced together, Marcus saw something even more dangerous than orders: routine coordination without a word spoken. An internal email leaked 3 years ago, provided by Mia from old data archives, showed Reeves wrote to subordinates, "Brooke knows how to keep the courtroom quiet." That statement, in the current context, was the clearest piece showing Daniel did not act alone. He was merely a tool of a hand skilled at steering crises under the guise of security. Marcus had no choice but to expose Reeves. He began compiling indirect data, assignment schedules, personnel maps inside courtrooms, testimonies canceled last minute due to technical reasons. A team of legal assistants was mobilized to check every file copy, searching for overlapping phrasing in reports, especially those opening identically. The trial proceeded under unfavorable conditions for security control. A specific plan was laid out: force Reeves to testify before the Federal Investigative Board as an expert witness, placing him in a position where avoidance was impossible. Though entitled to remain silent, once publicly appearing, his existence alone would compel the system to account for itself. That evening, when Mia met Marcus at the office, she asked why he believed Reeves was the key link. Marcus replied slowly, each word carved into the table. "If Brooke is the arm, then Reeves is the one tightening the rope, and I've seen that rope choking justice for far too long." Tom Willis arrived at the Internal Affairs headquarters on time, wearing a carefully pressed light gray tactical uniform, with his name tag aligned neatly on his chest. He carried nothing but a small notebook and a black pen. His face was calm, his steps steady, yet the person receiving the documents noticed his hand stiffen slightly as he signed the attendance confirmation. The room for the hearing was on the 3rd floor, with frosted glass doors and no nameplate. 3 members of the panel were already seated, a recorder quietly running in front of them. Tom was summoned as a witness supporting security at the trial. concerning Officer Daniel Brooks' conduct. This was the first time since the shocking courtroom incident that someone directly involved was called into a closed hearing. No reporters, no supervising lawyers, only suited individuals sitting behind a long table, eyes scrutinizing. They asked him to recount what had happened in the 10 minutes before Judge Violet Johnson was shocked by the taser. He began with an even tone, answering appropriately without exceeding any limits. I was assigned to the side door. I observed from the designated position. When an inspector asked for more details about Daniel's behavior that morning, Tom repeated, "I don't recall clearly. I was not tasked with supervising him." His words made the atmosphere heavy, not because of what was said, but because of the silence between the lines. A panel member placed a hand on the record, reading aloud the history of Tom and Daniel's work during the previous 3 hearings, all categorized under handling sensitive situations. When asked if he had ever received direct orders from superiors to stabilize the situation in the courtroom, Tom paused for a few seconds and then replied, "I only followed assignments. I do not comment on orders." A minute later, the final question was posed. "Did you see Daniel prepare a weapon in the courtroom?" No one spoke after the question ended. Tom sat upright, eyes fixed forward as if carefully weighing every word. 15 seconds passed, and he nodded slightly, speaking slowly. "I saw him stand up. I didn't see anything in his hands, but I saw the look in his eyes." That answer was neither confirmation nor denial. It belonged to the gray area, where systems prefer to hide. When the hearing ended, Tom stood and bowed. He walked to the door, hand on the handle, then paused. Without turning fully, he tilted his head just enough for his voice to reach the 3 people behind him. "Has anyone ever thought that sometimes silence is the way not to be erased by the system?" No one replied. The door closed softly, leaving behind a silence deeper than any answer could have. Tom walked down the hallway, his face still cold, but in his eyes something cracked. Not tears, but a fissure. From there, something very old within him began to fracture. After the closed hearing, Tom Willis returned to his unit in a half-awake, half-dreaming state. His office remained the same, the desk neat, the cold coffee cup from the previous day untouched, yet the looks were different. A colleague who usually shared morning news fell silent. A superior officer who often patted Tom's shoulder now only nodded, eyes briefly avoiding contact. No one said anything specific, but every gesture sent the same signal. He had become a variable, someone no longer sure which side he was on. That afternoon, when leaving the parking lot, Tom found a small note tucked under the windshield wiper. The paper was blank, unsigned, with a single handwritten sentence in slightly slanted black ink. "If you speak one more time, we won't be able to protect you." The note was unsigned and contained no direct threat, yet it was colder than a gun. The words did not aim to provoke fear, but to remind of his position. Silence was no longer a moral choice, but the only way to survive. Meanwhile, Marcus and Mia had found a critical match in the personnel assignment files before the trial. Tom's name appeared alongside Daniel's in the internal supervision team list, deployed by special request from the high-level coordination group, approved directly by Gideon Reeves. All information in the assignment was coded with administrative terms, but the timing was so close to the incident date, it was hard to call it a coincidence. A video excerpt from the second-floor corridor camera showed Tom and Daniel meeting exactly 3 minutes before the trial started. No dialogue, no specific action, only a very quick glance between the two. Daniel walked away immediately after, while Tom stood watching. In Mia's eyes, that look was like an acknowledgement before it was too late. Tom began waking each morning with unexplained headaches. He stopped opening his phone to read the news. Instead, he picked up a pen. The small leather notebook was placed under his pillow every night, where he began to record every detail, every expression, every sentence throughout the previous 3 hearings, times when the truth almost surfaced but was buried by a single look or an interrupted gesture. In a personal recording made with old equipment, Tom's voice was hoarse and broken. "I'm not a hero. I used to laugh when someone tried to accuse and no one listened. But if the system wants me to stay silent to keep wrongdoings going, maybe I should start speaking." No one heard those words then, but they were encoded and saved, ready for any possibility. Tom had not fully taken sides yet, but a shift had begun inside him, not with a declaration or heroic act, but with a silent refusal, the refusal to take part in another lie. And within that fracture, the first cracks on the wall of loyalty had appeared. They were quiet, but certain to spread. Violet Johnson entered the federal district court carrying an old suitcase and with clear, bright eyes. She was one of the first 2 black women selected for internship under the expanded recruitment policy aimed at racial equality. She never saw herself as a special case, yet the looks she received in the hallway on her first day taught her that not everyone thought the same. A colleague whispered to another as she walked by, "They're just hiring for show. She has hardly any experience." Violet neither reacted nor smiled. From early on, she had trained herself not to let such words touch the most vital nerve, belief in herself. During the first 2 months, her assignments were limited to typing case files, scheduling meetings, and occasionally printing documents for the main trial team. The valuable files were always given to others. Violet did not complain, but kept records of every case she skimmed through, every minute detail left on the meeting notes on her desk. She knew her internship time was short, and if she did not preserve something, she would leave as if she had never existed. One Wednesday afternoon, in a small professional meeting, Violet flipped to the end of a suspended sentence draft the team was preparing for approval. She noticed a new annotation added in blue ink, absent from the original file, allowing sentence reduction due to cooperation with law enforcement. The beneficiary was the son of a district police officer. Violet raised her hand calmly. "There is no record of this in the investigation files. Is this an addition made outside the court?" The room fell silent. The trial team leader glanced at her, forced a smile, and replied, "We work directly with the other side. Just focus on typing correctly." After the meeting, Violet was called aside. The leader hesitated before saying, "If you feel this pace doesn't suit you, you could transfer to civil affairs. They have a softer approach." 2 days later, an unmarked envelope appeared on Violet's desk. Inside was a single typed note, ink crisp and clear. "Know your place, girl." Violet took the note, placed it in her drawer, and locked it. She did not report it or ask anyone, but from that day, she began saving copies of every work email, every file she touched. The only person who noticed the change in Violet's eyes was Judge Harriet Lowen. She stayed the longest during Violet's first attended session and was the only one who asked her after the reprimand, "Are you planning to quit?" Violet shook her head. Harriet said nothing further, but quietly added Violet's name to the list of secretaries assisting politically sensitive trials. No one knew why Violet was chosen, but no one dared openly challenge the old judge, famed for being stricter than the law itself. One late evening, while working together, Harriet looked at Violet and calmly said, as if reciting an old formula, "They won't need evidence to remove you, so you must live as a mirror, showing no cracks." Violet nodded, making no promises, but for the first time, a completely different awareness lit in her eyes. She no longer thought she came here to prove competence. She understood she stood in a system accustomed to resistance through silence and elimination by intentional slips, and she had chosen not to retreat or retaliate, but to exist like a rock, enduring pressure without breaking. 3 years after Violet joined the system, she received a transfer notice. A cream-colored envelope was placed on her desk. No one handed it to her. No explanation accompanied it. The letter gave a brief reason, better suited to the workflow and nature of files. No mention of ability or evaluation, just a soft, seamless shift invisible to anyone outside the system. The destination was civil affairs, a position with less conflict, fewer controversies, and little chance to question authority. That afternoon, an emergency meeting was held. The criminal division chief skimmed the letter as if it were a routine adjustment. Violet sat quietly, observing the faces of those she had worked with. No one objected, yet no one dared to look at her longer than a blink. A colleague next to her even turned away slightly, toward the door, as if to end the connection. Violet did not argue at the meeting. She returned to her office, opened her computer, and started typing. Within 2 hours, she completed a 6-page internal response. There was no emotional language, no complaint. She listed the entire 3-year work process, number of cases handled, sensitive incidents, precedent-setting rulings, including evaluations from senior judges in federal cases, numbers, dates, names, everything presented as cold data. At the end, Violet added a short line, "If this is the reason I am deemed unsuitable, I will need a different system." The response was sent to Harriet Lowen, then an honorary member of the Regional Judicial Council. She said little, only attaching a note when forwarding the file for review. The unbent must be kept. 3 weeks later, the transfer request was withdrawn. No one came to notify her. No apology letter or restoration email followed. Everything happened as if no removal had ever been intended. But Violet sensed a change in the atmosphere. Lunch invitations disappeared. Professional meetings occurred without her name on the list. When assigned to lead a major trial, no one came to shake her hand or congratulate her. Her all warmth vanished, replaced by a silence moderated by a cold attitude, just enough to avoid breaching regulation. She did not take it as hurt. The only feeling left was clarity. Violet understood she had crossed an invisible line where loyalty was tested by isolation and independence punished by avoidance. Yet there, she also learned that sometimes, to exist as a person who does not compromise, one must accept walking alone. Violet folded the 6-page response and placed it in a gray file folder. She opened the metal cabinet in the corner of her room, where she kept all documents from her early days in the field. In the bottom drawer, an old memo from the first-year case remained intact, the paper yellowed with age. She slipped in the response, locked it. That drawer was not a place to store disappointment. It was armor forged from cracks, survived through seasons of solitude, and she knew that as she faced greater battles ahead, that armor would keep her from falling. Mia placed her hand over the send button, then withdrew it. She hesitated once more. The original video, the unedited version, still glowed on her screen. In her mind, a chain of possible scenarios unfolded. Threats, being traced, or worse, manipulation from within the system. Yet she chose to send it. The recipient was the deputy content director of the national television network, who had previously rejected her but recently sent a brief message, "If there's something truly undeniable, let me see it." She attached the HD video, a legal report, Marcus's verification letter, and a concise narration. All were encrypted with 2 separate layers of security. 10 minutes later, the reply came. "We will air it during prime time tonight. I will put my name on it." That evening, Mia switched on the TV. Sitting alone, her USB copy remained plugged into the laptop as a safeguard against remote attacks. The news program started normally, steadily. Just as the special investigation segment began, the screen suddenly switched to a cold announcement. "Signal interrupted due to technical difficulties. We apologize for the inconvenience." No background music, no explanation. Inside the broadcasting station, technicians scrambled. The main signal control center reported a system error. The log showed the transmission was cut from an unknown source through a VPN marked with internal identification. Unable to identify the device, no repair request reported. The head of the machine room called the leadership repeatedly, but only received the same response: "Handle it quickly. Don't make it a big deal." Mia received a call shortly after. Someone from the newsroom, voice frantic, said, "Our hands have been cut. Someone did this from outside or from higher up than us." She hung up, sat silently, then stood up, neatly packed all hard copies, and disconnected all online connections. An hour later, she arrived at the station. The technical manager, a familiar collaborator from before, led her into the backup machine room. He showed her the technical logs, a strange code accessed from a backup server, then cut all data transmission just as the video segment featuring Daniel Brooke appeared. It only cut that exact segment. Everything else aired normally. Mia asked, "Who approved today's content?" He shook his head and showed a review form, the signature replaced by a blurred stamp, not matching the usual pattern. Mia understood this was no longer a technical fault. She left the station clutching her bag as if it contained her life. In the car, she reopened the USB and checked the video's checksum. It was intact. She opened her email and began drafting a letter to an independent foreign platform, but deleted it. Not yet. I need one last move, and the right timing. When the red light came on at the third intersection, Mia glanced in the rearview mirror. The black car kept a measured distance, its headlights on low beam. She smiled faintly. They know, I know. But this time, she was not afraid. She had gone too far to turn back, and the truth had slipped beyond the control of a single station. It was knocking on the door of an entire system. Mia knocked 3 times on the faded silver iron door. A narrow slot opened, and a deep voice inside asked, "Who sent you?" She answered tersely, "Marcus." The censorship case. The door swung open, revealing a cramped space full of electronic equipment. The man, sitting amid tangled cables, was a cybersecurity expert, formerly employed by the Systems Management Bureau, dismissed after exposing unauthorized citizen surveillance. "Don't call me by my real name," he said, already starting to connect devices. Mia handed him the hard drive containing the video and the corrupted access logs from the TV station. "I want to know who cut my hand," she said, "and where they wielded the knife from." They began tracing a chain of fake IP addresses. The data passed through 3 VPN layers, 2 foreign servers, but the last layer unexpectedly pointed back to a familiar spot. The Data Coordination Hub at the City Police Office, where Violet had launched a covert audit 3 years ago, stalled without official reason. Mia looked at the network map. "They used the police server to block communications?" The other nodded, pulling out a piece of malicious code from the recorded system. "Look at this." He projected a command line on the screen, an automated program set to scan all video content containing the phrase, "Taser Judge Johnson." Whenever it detected this phrase, the system automatically redirected the file to a censorship zone and removed it from the broadcast schedule. No one does this directly. They programmed it and let the system act on its own. The program's access permission, according to verification, required the highest level administrator rights. This meant no one except those controlling the state media system or someone closely linked to the Internal Affairs Department could intervene. Mia leaned back in her chair, closed her eyes for a few seconds. She realized she could not confront this head-on. Major media was locked down, the censorship system fully automated, and any data related to the case would vanish before ever going on air. A few days later, she changed strategy. She split the original video into segments, encrypted each part separately, and gave them false names that did not contain recognizable keywords. These segments were sent to international human rights organizations, independent investigative channels, and a clandestine network of journalists across Europe and South America. Each part carried a piece of the truth, enough to provoke curiosity, enough for someone to want to find the rest. In a temporary apartment, Mia recorded a diary entry using voice modification software to mask her voice. "When those who control fear the light, we must let the light slip through every crack." She sent the recording along with a 3-second clip to allies, images of sparks from a stun gun, Violet's stunned eyes, and a hand caught off guard. "Small pieces will cause interference," she whispered, "and interference will disrupt the system." As she stepped out the door, she knew the battle had moved beyond justice. This was a fight for the right to speak, even if no one dared to hear it all at once. The phone rang as Violet was returning from a confidential meeting with a group of independent lawyers. The evening corridor of the apartment building was so quiet that every footstep echoed clearly. The screen showed a completely blank caller ID. No area code, no contact name, no call history. Violet paused, stared at the screen for a few seconds, then put the phone to her ear. She said nothing, but the man's voice on the other end spoke without invitation. "If you want to live, stay silent. This is not the last time." His words were neither loud nor angry, without any obvious emotion, yet the cold calmness made the threat feel like a blade pressed sharply against her neck. Then the call ended. No sound, no curse, no sign the recording system was still active. When she tried to check again, the device displayed a temporary memory access error, exactly like the technical interference Mia had described in previous investigations. Violet stood silently by her door for nearly a minute. Her hands did not tremble, but her gaze darkened. After a few moments, she unlocked her phone and dialed Marcus. When he answered, she recounted every word she had heard, every pause, every tone. Marcus was silent during the first part of the story, only speaking after she finished. "We just hit their greatest fear." Violet did not argue. She said, if they weren't worried, they wouldn't threaten. That very night, Marcus reopened old case files, a list of power abuse incidents from the past decade that he had provided legal support for. Among over 50 cases, he reviewed witnesses who had suddenly withdrawn without clear reasons. 3 names stood out: a medical worker, a forensic technician, and a mother who had been assaulted by police while searching for her child in custody. The files showed all 3 had told their lawyers they had personal matters to handle before cutting off all contact. Their initial testimony shared one detail. They all received anonymous calls with short, non-abusive warnings, vague but unmistakable. None of them had appeared publicly since. Marcus recognized this was no personal intimidation, but a method, an organized, sophisticated behavior branch that required no guns, only the right amount of fear. He marked every line and wrote a handwritten note: fear as a tool, and justice is the real threatened target. The next morning, he emailed this analysis to Violet with encryption and a single line: if they threaten you because you stood up, then this time, we must make sure you stand alone no longer. Violet did not reply. Yet 3 hours later, she appeared at the courthouse, wearing dark clothing and a Judicial Association badge pinned on her left chest, heading straight to the Federal Investigation Council's office unannounced. Marcus did not wait. After Violet's threatening call last night, he knew hesitation meant something would be destroyed before exposure. Mia's video remained encrypted, never released. But he needed a proactive move and could not rely solely on internal systems. He called Mia directly. "I need the original." She asked no questions, sending the encrypted file within 3 minutes. Immediately after, Marcus split the file and sent parts to 3 independent legal organizations: the Civil Justice Association, the Federal Witness Protection Group, and the International Data Oversight Office. Each received only a portion sufficient for verification. No one held the entire content except him. That evening, Marcus posted a personal bulletin on his legal page, which only a few hundred followed. But this time, the headline spread rapidly. He publicly released an excerpt from the video, the exact moment Daniel drew his stun gun, and attached part of an internal file from 1998. It was a page once altered by Harold Crane, now compared to the original, with red ink marks and a faded note. File requires reprocessing before counsel Marcus wrote a single line with a quote: "We will not stay silent because the threat no longer stands in the shadows. It trembles within them." The impact exceeded expectations. The hashtag Justice for Violet instantly returned to the top trend, but this time it was no longer a small, angry group. Lawyers who had remained silent began posting publicly. Law schools opened forums for discussion that very night. An international oversight organization from Europe sent a letter requesting participation in the investigation's monitoring, because this is not just an abuse case, but an ethical test for the American judiciary. The system's SI reacted cautiously. The state justice inspector's spokesperson told the media that unverified information must be handled carefully, not naming Marcus directly, but clearly implying him. They neither denied the video nor confirmed its authenticity, yet this ambiguous stance only fueled public outrage. Those who had remained silent began to speak out. A technician suspended in 2004 reposted a once-removed article. A woman forcibly removed from a 2011 trial for disrupting shared a recording of herself being dragged out for daring to ask questions. Voices thought long buried surged back, as if waiting for a crack to burst through the wall of silence. That night, Violet sat alone in her living room. The apartment was quiet except for the wind brushing against the glass. On the table lay a handwritten manuscript. She had not reread or edited it. The first page remained unfinished, bearing a line written with firm but steady handwriting. "They want me to fear. I choose to speak." Beside it lay her phone, face down. The screen was off, reflecting the hallway light like a reminder. Silence is always the easier choice, but it is also what the weak need most to survive. Under the dim yellow light of the Judicial Archive room, Marcus flipped through each page of the file marked confidential. Every line of text, every number was examined carefully. When he reached the transcript of the first hearing between Judge Violet and Officer Daniel Brooke, he paused. Something was wrong. The recorded dialogue was interrupted unusually. There was no record of Violet's key statement just before the attack, the phrase that had chilled the courtroom atmosphere. Marcus pulled out a printed copy from Violet's personal files and compared each line. 3 exchanges had disappeared from the official archive system. He immediately called Mia Carter. She held the original video and the full recording log. Upon arrival, Mia asked few questions. She sat down, opened her computer, and matched each minute with the transcript. All traces matched, except the missing segment. The time of data loss coincided exactly with a system login from an account with Level 3 access, a permission level allowing edits before the document was officially stored. Marcus narrowed down the list of authorized users. Only 3 names appeared. One was Claire Dorsey, the judicial assistant responsible for taking minutes and filing documents. Claire was an unnoticed name within the system. She always dressed neatly, spoke softly, and left no impression in any meetings. But that very silence made Marcus wary. She had been the closest to Violet on the day of the incident, and the last to touch the draft before it was digitized. While reviewing footage from the corridor behind the courtroom, Marcus spotted a suspicious detail. A camera clip showed Claire speaking with Daniel before the session. They did not seem close, but the glance between them was not unfamiliar. He recalled a detail from an old meeting. Claire and Daniel had once studied in the same police academy class. A colleague had once let slip that they had been very close, but no one ever mentioned it again. Marcus wondered, were all Claire's choices purely rational, or was she protecting something from the past? He looked at the access list once more, his finger pausing on Claire Dorsey's name. No doubt remained. She had deleted the conversation. But why would someone like Claire, always compliant and discreet, do this out of loyalty or an unpaid debt? In Marcus's mind, the first cracks began to form in the facade of an ally thought harmless. And he knew if Claire was a link, then the puppeteer behind might have anticipated every step they were taking. The justice office was unusually quiet that afternoon. Marcus entered, holding a thin but carefully stapled file, stopping in front of Claire Dorsey's desk. She looked up at the footsteps, eyes briefly surprised but not alarmed. Marcus placed the printout on the table, sliding it gently toward her. "Did you erase what made justice fall silent?" His voice was low, but each word carried the weight of an indictment. Claire looked directly at Marcus, then lowered her gaze to the file. "No denial. I did what was necessary to protect the dignity of both sides. Sometimes truth causes bloodshed." Her tone remained soft, even, and composed as always. Neither a confession nor a sign of guilt, simply someone trying to maintain balance on the edge between reason and the past. During a 15-minute conversation, Claire revealed what Marcus had never suspected. In 2015, she had faced an internal investigation for accidentally exposing a witness list in a police trial. She was young, clumsy, and nearly prosecuted, but Daniel, then already well established, intervened and helped her avoid severe consequences. Since then, an invisible bond formed between them. Not love, not guilt, but simply a mixture of gratitude and fear. Claire knew if Daniel fell, the entire network behind him would be exposed, and she, having erred only once, would not withstand that storm. Marcus did not argue. He pulled out another file and calmly slid it toward Claire. "This is the updated version. You need to upload it to the federal hearing system according to proper procedure." Claire took it, Unaware this was no ordinary document, digitally signed with a technical fingerprint, the file was a trap Marcus set to verify if Claire would continue interference or stop. Every edit would leave an indelible trace in the internal monitoring system. When Marcus left the office, Claire opened the new file. Among the dense legal text and forms, her eyes rested on a small, italicized line at the bottom right corner of the last page. Is there loyalty that does not need re-examination in the light of justice? The question bore no command, no call, but carried weight that changed her expression. Claire sat for a long time, hand on the mouse, eyes deep in thought, staring at the system login screen. She knew if she took one more step, everything would be recorded, and if she stopped, the past she had kept secret for 10 years might reveal itself. The scene ended on that image. A woman who once thought herself invisible, now forced to choose before every escape route was closed. No voice echoed. Only the light on the screen awaited her final confirmation. A notification from the television station arrived in lawyer Marcus Reed's inbox early in the afternoon, containing only 2 lines that repeated the same reason. Due to the sensitive nature and risk of public misunderstanding, the video is prohibited from being broadcast as per instructions from the state-level Information Security Management. The language was cold and clean, revealing no clear source of directive, but leaving a distinct impression of interference. Marcus did not waste time responding. He called an old friend who had once managed cybersecurity infrastructure at a major news outlet and now worked freelance. The man named Carl, taciturn and agile, agreed to trace the issue that very afternoon. They began with the station's internal access data. Within an hour, Carl identified a chain of intervention commands not originating from within the station's system, as the logs showed, but coming from an independent server with a highly encrypted IP address. The system's prefix indicated it belonged to the Internal Strategic Communications Center of the State Police Department, a rarely mentioned unit, but known as the last filter for all sensitive information related to law enforcement. Carl opened an interface simulating the command flow. A single line of code sent at dawn served only 2 purposes: to lock editing access and automatically send an internal alert to all media channels within the control group. What caught Marcus's attention was the attached message in the original data: block broadcast, request recall of copies, warn legal consequences if violated. This was not technical jargon, but an administrative order. Someone had issued a decisive command as if handling a riot situation. Marcus leaned his hand against his forehead, eyes fixed on the screen. He was no stranger to interference, but this operations organization indicated a high-level authority behind it. To transmit an order down a state-level media network without court approval or official notice could only come from an internal unit with root access. Carl zoomed in on the transmission flowchart. Each command step was encrypted, yet left a layer of digital signature. From that trace, Marcus knew that if they could reach the issuer, they would find the Communication Control Center, long considered a shadow supporting police crisis suppression campaigns. The case of Violet being electroshocked in court did not formally contain elements of terrorism or national security threat. Yet the system's reaction forced Marcus to reconsider all assumptions. Why did they act as if suppressing a strategic leak? What was so frightening about that video that it needed to be eradicated at first broadcast? He stood and paced the small meeting room where Carl worked. The screen displayed the timeline of commands, data file names, routes, and destinations rejected from updates. Everything was too clean, too precise, seemingly programmed beforehand for this exact situation. Marcus stopped, looking at a single frame still showing locked status, then quietly said, "That video struck a nerve in a system that has survived by hiding." Carl looked up. "What do we do next?" Marcus replied, "Find out who holds the key." Carl pulled a small silver-gray device from his backpack. No screen, no brand, with only a single port. He plugged it into the workstation, typed a string of commands. The screen flickered to a high-level encryption interface, an access layer typically used by government servers for remote monitoring without leaving logs. Within 3 minutes, the device scanned 3 origin points where the video broadcast ban command passed, 2 from state data processing centers and 1 from response station A9, an identifier within an emergency communication system usually activated only when there is serious risk affecting law enforcement's image. Marcus stepped closer, eyes glued to the code streaming on the screen. The final destination was a virtual IP address, but bore a security signature from the state police department's internal network. Carl nodded in confirmation. This is not an individual act, it is a system response, pre-programmed. This command does not require direct operator approval. Just one keyword, and everything is blocked. Marcus asked, "What is the key word?" Carl smirked and retyped the reverse analysis command. A phrase appeared: judicial interference, potential liability exposure, suspend immediately. Marcus's eyes slowly closed. Those 3 words made clear that Violet's video was not only evidence of wrongdoing, but could trigger a cascade of automated reactions because it touched on 2 core issues: reputation and widespread legal risk. The room's atmosphere thickened. Carl packed up the device, unplugged cables, but kept the file recording the entire scan. He slid a copy onto a USB stick and placed it on Marcus's desk. "If you need to work with federal authorities, use this. To dig deeper, I will need more time and access to the Level 4 monitoring system, where the trail to the first order issuer can be traced." Marcus did not rush a decision. He knew every step now risked twisting the whole case. Nothing could leak too soon. Yet the system could not be allowed to keep burying evidence, as standard procedure. He glanced through the glass, the hallway sparsely populated. The office was on the 3rd floor, far from the regular file processing rooms. Carl left first, backpack on his shoulder without another word. Marcus slowly gathered his documents, his gaze pausing at a note on paper. Media is not where justice begins, but where it is first exposed. He recalled Violet's expression during the final questioning, not trembling, not angry, just a quietness, carrying long disappointment. That night, Marcus called the federal inspector's representative. He spoke briefly, without concealment. "I need internal access codes for Level 4 within 24 hours. There is evidence the system is programmed to intervene in investigations that could damage the state police's image. I have trace evidence." The line paused for a few seconds before replying. "If what you say is true, we need to meet in person. 9 a.m. tomorrow, office number 12. Marcus nodded, ended the call, and stared thoughtfully at the darkened screen before him. Darkness fell quickly beyond the window, but in his mind the system appeared clearer than ever. Not just a group of people, but a mechanism, a machine continuously defending itself. To break it required more than a report. It needed an open battle and a sacrifice. The 3rd floor auditorium of the city police department was packed. Below, the seating was divided by sections: local media, law enforcement staff, and representatives of civil organizations. Above the long wooden podium stood a row of microphones, with a sign on the left reading, "Official as spokesperson." Everything was prepared to control information and soothe public opinion after days of protests triggered by the incident involving Judge Violet Johnson. The spokesperson spoke first, his voice steady as if reading from a carefully vetted script. The internal counsel was also present, mentioning that the internal review process has not concluded, emphasizing that the temporary suspension is a necessary step to ensure transparency. Yet the atmosphere remained tense, as independent journalists and skeptical staff doubted the content presented. Important questions remained unanswered. Just as the spokesperson prepared to leave the podium, a figure emerged from the side of the auditorium. It was Tom Willis, an officer who had accompanied Daniel Brooke during the fateful trial. He wore a pale shirt, not uniformed, his face weathered by lack of sleep. No one among the organizers had anticipated his presence. Some stood up, cameras started rolling, and the conference coordinator hurried backstage. Tom did not stop. He walked directly to the central microphone, placed his hands on the edge of the table, and spoke clearly. "My name is Tom Willis. I am a direct witness to the incident in court that day." The room seemed to lose all sound. The spokesperson tried to intervene, but was slower than the media's reaction. All lenses turned toward Tom. An independent station's camera even began live streaming. He did not glance at notes, nor ask permission, his eyes fixed on the press row. I remained silent because I thought I had no choice. I thought speaking out would cost me everything, but I was wrong. I lost much more through silence. Behind him, the coordinator motioned to cut the microphone, but Tom's voice carried through the separate recording devices. He continued, unfaltering, "I was not in court by chance that day. I was assigned to help stabilize the situation if the trial turned unfavorable. Unfavorable for whom, you all know." A murmur ran through the seats. A female reporter raised her camera closer. The spokesperson came up from below, trying to edge beside Tom to signal him to stop, but he turned, no longer the obedient follower of orders. "I obeyed commands. I knew in advance Brooks' intentions. I remained silent when I should have spoken out, and when I saw Judge Violet get struck by a taser, toppled on her own bench, I knew what I was doing was no longer support. It was complicity." The main microphone went dead, but the cameras did not stop. An independent reporter's live stream continued to capture every word clearly. Tom pulled a stack of papers from his inner jacket pocket and threw them on the table. "This is the copy of the report I refused to sign. The part I was forced to remove is when Brooke pulled out the taser. I still have the original, and if anything happens to me after today, the original will be sent to the federal prosecutor's office." A reporter quickly aimed her phone toward the projection screen behind Tom, where the police department's logo ironically shone. The organizers panicked, and the coordinator ordered the signal cut, but it was too late. Numerous social media accounts began reposting the live stream. The room descended into real chaos. The spokesperson withdrew, the internal counsel disappeared from the chair. Some officers quietly left their seats, avoiding the camera. Tom, after his final statement, stepped down from the podium, without bodyguards or anyone stopping him. He walked straight out the back door in thick silence, leaving behind a system pushed off its familiar tracks, a system about to answer questions it had long avoided. Tom entered the emergency meeting room, temporarily set up on the ground floor of the inspector's office. No banners, no microphones, just a long table, a few metal chairs, and piles of files waiting to be opened. Across the table, Marcus Reed sat quietly with two federal investigators. The air was thick with anticipation. After all that had happened, what they needed most was one final link, a messenger to convey the command. Tom sat down without looking at anyone. He took out a folded piece of paper and placed it on the table as if setting down something burning. "The night shift captain that day was Raymond Nash," he said. No introduction, no lead-in. The statement cut sharply through the atmosphere. He never said it outright, gave no documents, but everyone in the force knows what it means to hear. If she starts causing trouble, support Daniel in calming the situation. Marcus slowly opened the file in front of him, flipping to the section named Raymond Nash. The name was familiar, mentioned in an internal investigation 3 years prior, a case involving a suspect's death during escort, but the file was closed just 12 days later due to lack of verification. Nash had signed the final confirmation on that case. Tom looked straight at Marcus, his voice steady and low, as if reading aloud what he had tried to forget. "I thought I was doing the right thing, that the system had a broader vision than any individual could see, that chaos needed to be cleaned up before it spread." He paused, eyes fixed on the table, as if reliving what he didn't want to recall. "But when I stood less than 2 meters from Violet, when I saw Daniel pull out the taser and saw her look at me, not with fear, but with a questioning gaze, I understood I was standing on the wrong side." One investigator tapped lightly on the table, glancing toward Marcus. The lawyer nodded, then turned to Tom. "Are you ready to make an official statement with that name?" Tom did not hesitate. "I've been ready since I took the stand. What's left, I no longer want to carry." That same afternoon, all information relating to Raymond Nash was forwarded to the Federal Analysis Unit. Old investigation reports were reopened. Cases with suspiciously closed files were brought back for review. Nash had yet to speak, but middle command held a long closed-door meeting. Some senior officers withdrew from public statements, citing a temporary break to avoid affecting public opinion. That evening's news broadcast featured a video compilation of the hearing, with Tom's testimony titled in bold, "Internal Confession. The First Brick Falls." No effects, no voiceover. The over 10-minute clip was shared hundreds of thousands of times. There appeared a man who once was loyal, bowing his head to tell the truth, and people began asking how many other Tom Willises remained silent. That very night, Tom was moved to a witness protection area under emergency protocol. All personal information was removed from official systems. Marcus received confirmation from the federal authorities that Tom's testimony had opened sufficient grounds to consider criminal investigation against Raymond Nash and anyone connected to the tactical response team operating outside official records. But more important than that was what began spreading throughout the city. A crack. The first fissure appeared between layers of tightly sealed steel. It did not come from public pressure, but from someone inside. A snapped cord, and the entire system starting to sag. What was once inviolable now began shaking from its core. The basement B2 of the old administrative building always carried a musty smell, a mix of old papers and aged concrete. The fluorescent lights along the ceiling flickered dimly, producing soft buzzing sounds. No one came down here in the afternoon except archive staff or those temporarily disciplined. Mia Carter walked quickly past 2 rows of metal shelves. Her eyes scanning the faded labels on the file boxes, she was following handwritten instructions from memory, precise down to each storage code column. The old access card was provided by a former technician who had helped her break a financial misconduct case in the Western Urban District. After being fired, he vanished from the city but left behind a few literal keys for people like Mia. She swiped the card at the gate. The door clicked open softly. Inside was a long row of metal filing cabinets, each drawer classified by unit code, receipt date, and access level. She searched through folders marked as related to the tactical coordination team, along with internal files of trials containing sensitive elements. After nearly 10 minutes, her hand stopped on a folder fastened with a gray fabric strap. The label read, "Restricted Access, Level 1 Directive." A printed signature in the lower right corner said Hemsworth E. Mia's heart raced as she pulled the folder out and placed it on a nearby wooden table. Pages in the dossier were marked in red ink, some with internal meeting minutes, others with handwritten reminders. One page made her pause longer than usual. The scrawled black ink read clearly, "Message forwarded to night shift captain. Respond according to strategic control protocol if the subject leaves the trial perimeter." No recipient name, no exact time, but this note was among documents connected to the most recent hearing, the day of the incident with Judge Violet Johnson. Mia took out her phone, switched the camera to no flash mode, and took successive photos of the critical pages. Her hand did not tremble, but each breath grew heavier. She knew she held more than paper. She held traces of a verbal order transformed into field action, while the whole system still insisted no official directive existed. As she photographed the last page, she heard metallic squeaks outside the hallway. Steady, firm, slow footsteps approached. Someone was coming down. Mia quickly stuffed her phone into her jacket pocket, folded the folder, and returned it to its place as if untouched. She retreated to a side service door on the right, used only by technicians to move large equipment. The side door was locked with a mechanical latch. Mia gently turned it open and slipped into the narrow corridor, running parallel to the main room. Outside, footsteps neared the main door. She walked briskly, avoiding touching the walls. Her palms sweated, but her breathing remained steady. Within minutes, she escaped the basement, blending into a hallway leading to the technical area behind. It was dusk when Mia stepped out into the back courtyard. She circled the empty parking lot, cautiously not pulling out her keys too soon. eyes flicking toward security cameras along the corridor. One in the upper corner blinked a light. She knew it was active. Her face had surely been caught on film. Her arm instinctively raised her collar slightly higher. Getting in the car, Mia sat still for a few seconds, checking her phone. All images were safely stored, automatically backed up to encrypted cloud storage. She inserted a small USB into a spare port, creating another copy. Her instinct said nothing clear, but every sense warned. Time to keep this information safe was running out. Someone would surely audit the access system once they noticed the folder had been opened. Starting the engine, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The lot was empty, but a door on the ground floor was closing slowly. Mia did not stop to confirm. The car rolled out through the side gate. On the passenger seat, a jacket with printed copies stirred slightly with the bumps, as if reminding her that what she carried was not just evidence, but a lit fuse pressed against a powder keg. Later that afternoon, Mia returned to the newsroom headquarters. The atmosphere inside was unlike usual. No one stopped to greet her in the hallway. The newsroom door was unlocked, but the central server screen no longer showed her name on the assignment list. Approaching her desk, the computer was completely off, locked behind an unfamiliar interface. She tried her password, no response. A nearby colleague turned around, eyes revealing awkwardness. Ray, a man who had helped Mia produce many major news pieces, quietly pulled her near the door. His voice dropped, as if afraid of being overheard. "Someone from the city office called, asking to suspend all your access. They cited review of unauthorized operational conduct. You're off this week's assignment." Mia didn't ask further. She knew this was no operational accident. Someone had discovered her actions in the basement. She turned away, not leaving the building immediately but searching for an unused editing room. Locking the door, opening her personal laptop and activating backup encryption. The documents she'd copied in the basement were opened for one last review. The note signed Hemsworth E. was still inside. A bold line at the bottom made her pause. Priority response. If the trial officer is involved in unresolved cases, take measures to maintain order. Authorization level, level 2, non-lethal response. She reread it, then saved everything to a USB with anti-trace chip installed. Simultaneously, a second encrypted copy was sent to Marcus Reed's private address, accompanied by a brief message, "I may not be here when you read this, but the evidence will remain." She left the room and walked toward the executive office area. The TV station leader, a man who once praised her as the unbowed voice of the digital age, invited her into his private office with a cold coffee waiting. "I hope you understand the situation is very sensitive now. City security is reviewing content related to recent controversies." Mia smiled coldly, standing before he finished. "If you fear being implicated, rest assured, I won't broadcast anymore, but I will make someone read it somewhere. No one dares to cut the signal." She left the building without looking back. Outside the parking lot, lights began to flicker on here and there. Approaching her car, her gaze stopped immediately at the side. A long scratch, tracing around the door handle. Very even, very deliberate. On the windshield wiper, a small piece of paper taped with clear tape, folded in half. Messy handwriting. "Curiosity has a price. Silence is cheaper." Mia stood there for a few seconds, not out of fear, but to confirm what her instincts had warned before. She slipped the note into her pocket, started the engine, gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles strained. In her mind, only one image repeated. The text, Level 2, non-lethal response. They had planned. They were prepared for someone daring to confront. She would not stop, but she was no fool to think she could act alone forever. The video, notes, and all photocopied files would be split into many parts and sent to different places. Each copy was a chance to survive, not giving them a single point to target. On her way home, the phone buzzed. Marcus had received the file. The message was only 2 words, "We begin." Mia read it, turned off the screen. She knew the next strike wouldn't be on television. It would take place among questions, at a hearing where this time the audience would be the entire public, and nothing would be cut out anymore. It was drizzling as Marcus Reed turned onto the cobblestone road leading into the suburban neighborhood in the south. Moss-covered rooftops sat set back behind ancient oak trees, silent and damp like memories no one dared to touch. He stopped in front of a house with a chest-high cement wall, a half-closed gate, no doorbell, no nameplate. He knew this place well. He had visited years ago when he was still a legal assistant, back when Harold Crane's name still carried weight in judicial circles. Now the man had retreated into seclusion, avoiding the public eye. Yet a shadow of the past does not fade simply because the door is closed. Marcus knocked 3 times, firm enough so no one inside could pretend not to hear. Soon after the old wooden door opened, Harold Crane appeared in a thick brown wool sweater, silver hair, his gait slightly leaning left, eyes aged but still alert. He showed no surprise seeing Marcus, only stepped aside, gesturing him in. No greetings, no questions about the visit. It was as if both knew this meeting had been destined long ago. The living room retained its old-fashioned style, a glass-topped tea table, gray-cushioned wooden chairs, and a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf packed with untitled, leather-bound files. Marcus placed his briefcase on the table and opened the first paper, a copy of an internal memo dated June 1998. It contained a proposal: transfer Judge Johnson away from cases involving law enforcement to avoid triggering chain reactions within internal agencies. Harold stared at the page for a long time. He did not pick it up. He did not deny it. He simply looked as if reviewing a minor detail unworthy of mention. Marcus flipped to the second page, a handwritten note on faded yellow paper. Blue ink still clear. People of color should be spectators, not actors in the main show. The bottom right corner bore the initials HC triple underlined. No further explanation needed. "Do you deny this?" Marcus asked in a low voice stretched tight like steel wire. "I need to hear it from you. Did you write this?" Harold was silent. He took a sip from his teacup, then set it down without replying. His gaze left the papers and turned toward the window, where raindrops traced long streaks. Marcus leaned forward, eyes locked on his counterpart. "You tried to push Violet out of the system. She had only worked 5 years, with good performance and no violations. Yet you chose skin color as the reason to decide a person's future. Now, when she was shot inside the very courtroom you once managed, you sit here without a word." Crane closed his eyes for a moment. His hand tightened on the armrest. He aged noticeably in those seconds. When he opened them, he spoke slowly, as if binding himself. "I once believed some people were fit for the court, and others were not. Not because of ability, but because the system did not accept abnormalities. A black woman, to me then, was an abnormality. And now," Marcus pressed. Harold did not answer immediately. He looked directly into Marcus's eyes, weight for the first time heavy there. "Now I understand. I did not fail because I could not push her out. I failed because I thought the system would do it for me, but it didn't, and she still stands, even after being knocked down." Marcus gathered the files, eyes cold. He said nothing. No thanks, no promises of secrecy. Every word had been recorded, an audio file hidden in a fountain pen resting on the page. What Marcus needed was not repentance. He needed confirmation, and he had it. Stepping out of the worn house, the rain had stopped, but the musty smell clung tightly to the air. In his hand was the crumpled paper marked with ink that would not fade, the handwritten symbol of a man once powerful enough to reshape another's future with a single remark. Now all rested firmly in Marcus's grasp, not for revenge, but to prove that some words once written are forever accusation. The room fell silent again. Marcus neither nodded nor interrupted. He sat quietly, waiting for Harold Crane to continue, like one listening to a lost soul, attempting to retrace his life map backwards. Harold leaned into the chair, eyes still on the misted window. "I pressured her to quit, not because she lacked ability. Violet was precise, principled, and known for not yielding once in the courtroom. But the system we maintained did not want anyone too rigid. It needed cooperation, not reflection. A black judge presiding over police cases was seen then as an uncontrollable catalyst. I did not want confrontation, I wanted rhythm. So I pushed. Marcus leaned slightly forward, hands gripping the wrinkled papers at the bottom edge. Do you know, the only thing that angers people more than injustice is polite excuses. Violet stayed, did not quit, did not change a single line in her file when forced to rewrite her assessments. And what did you do? You put stability above justice. Harold looked back at Marcus. For the first time, some emotion flickered at the corner of his eye. Do you think I never asked myself that? I thought I acted for the common good. I believed what I did kept order, prevented trials from turning into forums. But in the end, I realized I held nothing back. Everything broke. She was still shot inside the courtroom, and I lost the right to say I was right. Marcus nodded lightly. Then answer me. Why turn your back on a competent person just because of skin color? Harold did not avoid the question. He looked Marcus straight in the eye, voice lowering but clear. Because I was afraid. Not afraid of her, but afraid that if she stayed and outperformed everyone who ever sat in that chair, the system I believed in would have to look at itself. I did not want it to break, so I chose to push. I did not fail because I could not push her away. I failed because I thought the system would do it for me, and I waited for years for it to do so. Marcus said nothing. He simply sat quietly, eyes still, as if hearing a confession from a place where confessions had once been shredded by thousands of excuses. He stood up, gathered the files, closed the briefcase with a swift motion. The fountain pen on the table was returned to his inner jacket pocket. The full recording of the conversation had been saved, no permission needed, no announcement required. This was the final test of the past, and he had what he needed. Not evidence for prosecution, but a milestone to re-examine every verdict the system once distorted in the name of stability. Outside, the rain had ceased. Afternoon light spread softly like a thin dust layer over the crooked porch. Marcus walked across the old cobblestone path, holding the briefcase tightly. Inside, the crumpled paper bore an indelible ink mark, the handwritten sign of a man who once held the power to decide another's fate with a single line of commentary. Now everything lay clearly in Marcus's hands, not for vengeance, but to prove that some words, once written, will forever be accusations. Early in the morning, a brief statement from the State Office of the Inspector General was released simultaneously on 3 major media channels and officially posted on the agency's oversight portal. The content was short, consisting of 4 paragraphs, but every line aimed to reassure public opinion. One passage clearly stated, "A formal criminal investigation will be conducted against Officer Daniel Brooke regarding the use of force during duty at a hearing presided over by Judge Violet Johnson." The second line drew even more attention. Simultaneously, the investigation will be expanded to cover the coordination procedures of courtroom security, the roles of senior personnel, and the possibility of indirect orders related to controlling trial conduct. The external reaction erupted immediately. Human rights organizations collectively issued statements supporting this move, viewing it as a positive signal after a long series of delays. However, many opinions expressed doubts about transparency, since the investigative body still belonged to the same executive system that had previously shielded Daniel. Some scholars and legal activists questioned, if the system entrusted with investigating its own abuse of power, can the conclusion ever truly be objective? Against this tense backdrop, Daniel Brooke appeared at the first summons hearing. The closed meeting room, located at the Federal Inspection Committee headquarters, featured oak-paneled walls and a long U-shaped table. Daniel arrived on time, accompanied by his private lawyer, a graying man specializing in defending cases involving use of force. Unlike past hearings where Daniel wore police or tactical uniforms, this time he donned a dark suit and gray shirt without a tie, meticulously groomed in every detail. Yet his attitude remained unchanged, indifferent, upright, his eyes almost detached as they scanned everyone in the room. When the chairperson asked the first question, requiring the summoned individual to confirm understanding of legal responsibilities in the criminal investigation, Daniel did not respond. His lawyer lightly raised a hand, pulled a note from his briefcase and presented it. "My client will exercise the right to remain silent under the law." Throughout the more than 40 minutes of the hearing, silence was the only repeated answer. Though silent, Daniel Brooke emitted many other signals. He frequently looked around the room, his gaze lingering longer on those without voting rights. When a young member of the committee questioned the reason for drawing the taser, Daniel looked directly at him, then smiled very faintly. It was not a social smile, but a vague grin, as if already foreseeing what would happen next. Many in the room noticed, but no one spoke. It felt like a man sitting in a siege, yet believing the noose had been loosened from behind. Mia Carter, invited as an independent media observer, sat in the last row. She took notes by hand, quietly watching every expression. In her black notebook, the first line of her draft appeared. "The only one not trembling is the one who believes the noose was removed beforehand." For her, the terrifying thing was not silence, but the eyes that knew they would never truly be held accountable. The hearing ended without any breakthrough. Daniel left first without looking at anyone. His lawyer nodded politely. Those remaining quietly gathered documents, as if accustomed to meetings where truth's importance was uncertain. But everyone understood. This was just the first step. Behind that door, a long battle was truly beginning, and this time, if he escaped again, the system would have no one to blame but itself. 3 days after the first hearing, Marcus Reed entered the inspection committee's hall carrying a black suitcase and a carefully paged list. On the table before him lay what the system had once considered scattered pieces, but when linked, formed a map of a manipulation mechanism that had existed for more than 2 decades. He did not begin with a harsh statement. Instead, he slid the first file from his case onto the table and started reading each part. The open letter from independent lawyers, the original uncut courtroom video, a memorandum signed by Gideon Reeves with the directive to maintain order by all means, and finally, an audio recording of a confrontation with Harold Crane, formerly the highest-ranking official in the state judicial apparatus. No one interrupted him. Those with authority knew well that once evidence was presented publicly and to the media, denial was no longer a strategic option. The investigative committee, expected to confine the case to Daniel Brooke's individual actions, was now forced to broaden its inquiry. They were not merely facing an officer who drew a taser. They were confronting a system that had let him believe such actions were lawful. The division became clear and exchanged glances among members. Some mid-level representatives who had once kept silent on opaque cases now nodded slowly as Marcus presented the interaction map of special personnel deployments over the past 10 years. They did not speak openly, but their eyes no longer denied. Some took notes with trembling hands. Others leaned back as if considering for the first time in years the true value of the word neutrality. Conversely, the conservative faction tightened ranks. Some whispered about the danger of creating uncontrollable precedents. Others questioned the legality of the recording from Harold Crane. They did not deny what Marcus presented, but cast doubt on motives and the political impact of probing the system's roots. This was not the first time skepticism was used to blur the clarity of evidence. Daniel Brooke appeared at the second summons hearing unchanged, still in a dark suit, accompanied by his lawyer, and still absolute silence. He neither rebutted nor looked directly at his interrogators, but did not bow his head. When asked about his connection to Captain Gideon Reeves, he adjusted his collar and silently sat back, as if the investigation were a scripted play with a predetermined ending. Mia sat in the corner, eyes fixed on every nonverbal detail. After the hearing, she left the hall with Marcus. As they stepped into a side corridor where media personnel were asked to remain outside, she quietly asked, "What do you think he's waiting for?" Marcus stopped and pulled out a note he had prepared the night before. "He's betting on the cowardice of the whole system, and he's never lost that game." That statement was not a prediction, but a truth proven by many times he quietly retreated, by countless rewritten reports, by the silence the system always reserved for those who acted according to its unspoken rules. But this time something was different. This time the evidence was not held by one person alone. It was scattered across dozens of hard drives, copies, testimonies, reports, memories, and the simmering anger of the public. The system could no longer retreat without paying the ultimate price of its remaining credibility. Marcus knew this, Mia knew this, and Daniel knew too. Only he had not yet believed this game no longer revolved around him. The hearing room was simply arranged, with white light illuminating a long wooden table. Behind it sat 3 high-backed chairs for federal representatives and a special prosecutor. The ceiling was soundproofed, and no cameras or reporters were allowed. Phones and recording devices were banned, ensuring strict control over everything. Tom Willis sat at the head of the table, slightly hunched, hands intertwined. His police uniform still bore its badge, but his gaze had changed from that of a law enforcer to someone pushed out of his comfort zone. Marcus Reed observed silently from across the table as the panel opened with a brief warning. Today's testimony is confidential, but carries the weight of a sworn court oath. If you lie, consequences will extend beyond disciplinary action. Tom showed no reaction, only steady breaths and trembling hands under the light. When asked if he was ready to cooperate, he remained silent, neither nodding nor shaking his head. Marcus placed a red-followed file on the table, saying it contained all internal investigations involving Tom over the past 5 years, including 3 with interference from an unofficial group. He asked if Tom wanted their names read aloud. Tom looked up, but said nothing. The federal inspector added that cooperation today could place Tom in a special protection program, with new identity and security. Silence, however, meant no offer would be made. Tom's eyes reddened as he said, "I witnessed 2 people disappear. One was my friend. A week after submitting an investigation report, he slipped from a parking garage's 3rd floor. No cameras worked. It was ruled an accident." His laugh echoed oddly in the silent room. Marcus pushed forward a federal guarantee document, urging Tom to choose between living hunted by silence or living because of truth. The room seemed frozen as Tom exhaled slowly, breaking the tension. "I will speak, but if I fall downstairs next week, check my safe for a backup hard drive." The panel noted everything silently. A fuse had been pulled, and the system faced a truth it was not used to. Tom began hesitantly, his voice low and broken. Gradually gaining strength, he revealed a department group called the Special Control Unit, unnamed officially, but powerful enough to interrupt any process when political factors were involved. They did not issue orders directly, but made suggestions no one dared refuse. When asked who first contacted him, Tom named Lieutenant Colonel Marvin Dole, who approached him after Tom refused to falsify a report. Dole warned him about handling things quickly at higher levels. Tom was reassigned to night shifts for 3 months afterward, without explanation. Transfers were internal matters, and questioning was forbidden. Tom then described his most recent case. Before a trial involving a black youth, the captain told him to ease the atmosphere if the judge overreacted, referring clearly to Judge Violet Johnson, known for blocking internal investigations and forcing officers out. Tom was assigned to accompany Brooke that day, officially as support, but actually to monitor potential defiance. He confirmed overhearing a call where Brooke was told, "If she overdoes it, you know what to do," to which she responded, "Understood." No recordings existed, but everyone took notes eagerly. Tom was ordered to alter the report after the incident by removing the period between when Brooke drew her taser and when the judge lost consciousness, to avoid misunderstandings. He refused to sign, and his system account was suspended the next day without official notice. Marcus asked if anyone else knew. Tom named Leonard Briggs, a system technician last seen before a key video was censored and disappeared from the system. After the hour-and-a-half hearing, the panel approved Tom's request for witness protection and expanded investigations into internal accounts linked to data manipulation. Before leaving, Marcus assured Tom he was no longer part of the problem, but the key to solving it. Tom nodded for the first time in months, his face relaxed but eyes cautious. He understood that even after speaking out, the system's back door remained open, and when cornered, it acted not by law, but by instinct. An emergency meeting took place in a soundproof office deep within the third floor of the federal inspector's office. Marcus Reed sat at the head of the table, eyes fixed on the screen before him. Investigators, justice oversight representatives, and a data security technician were present. They all knew this was more than an evidence review. It was time to expose a name long avoided. The internal data access log showed 2 interrupted accesses from a mid-level account, but the last entry, encrypted with top priority access, was what Marcus insisted on unlocking. The name that appeared was Edward L. Hemsworth. Silence filled the room. Edward had been chief of discipline for the city police for over 10 years, before becoming a strategic advisor unsupervised but with deep access. What struck Marcus was not just Edward's authority, but the timing. That account activated the censorship on the original video Mia Carter tried to release, on the day she was blocked by internal media censors. Marcus clenched his jaw. He knew Edward from his time as a young prosecutor, but had never worked with him directly. For Violet, the name was familiar. Receiving the information that afternoon, she read slowly, fingers tracing the paper as if touching an old past. At the last page, she closed the file and looked up, expressionless. Edward was the first to teach me how to write a petition, she said quietly, and the first to tell me not to send it if I wanted to keep my seat. Early in her career, Violet was a tough judge, often clashing with those who prioritized stability first. Edward trained potential staff and oversaw transfers of those not fitting the system's culture. She once opposed a transfer order he signed after finding personnel records tampered with. The system's response was silent but firm. She was reassigned to simple civil cases for 3 years without explanation and pleaded. Hen liked things quiet, Violet said, and was ready to sink anyone who caused ripples. The council reviewed Edward's case the next day. Some members were surprised or doubted, since he was nominally retired. Marcus proved his access remained intact, but no one was allowed to question it. An investigator asked Violet, "Do you think he acted for power or to protect the system?" Looking out the window, Violet answered clearly, "I once thought I escaped. But some don't leave. They dig deeper." For over a decade after retirement, Edward vanished from official meetings. His name disappeared from reports and websites. Yet the system kept his silent presence where needed. As special advisor, he held deep access, a privilege few had. Marcus found a pattern in data interventions. Controversial edits occurred during rare, unnoticed system update gaps. Edward's orders never bore explicit labels but were disguised as operational coordination or media impact limitation. These protected the system while shielding abuses of power. Edward's mechanism was invisible control. No direct orders, only creating situations forcing others to act. Records disappeared without signed deletions, and blame fell on those deemed acting spontaneously. Edward's role was to keep everything just unbalanced enough to hide the truth. Marcus chose to meet Edward directly. The meeting was set at Edward's modest wooden house near the northern forest. After knocking twice, Edward opened the door, still steady with gray hair and a faint smile. "Here because of Violet?" Edward asked first. Marcus replied cautiously, "I'm here because of the system you still hold, despite retiring." Edward smiled and said, "I don't hold the system. I keep it from collapsing." Their conversation was calm but sharp. Marcus showed Edward the access logs matching the interventions. Edward neither denied nor excused, saying, "Sometimes what threatens justice is not rule breakers but those obsessed with enforcing it strictly." Marcus slammed the table. "You're not holding justice up. You're holding your seat from falling." Edward asked calmly, "And you think justice stands if I trip it?" The question lingered in Marcus's mind. This was no simple right versus wrong fight, but a generational clash between those who closed the past for stability and those who believe justice must shine even into darkness. The next day's Justice Oversight meeting revealed division. Some proposed a criminal investigation of Edward for unauthorized data tampering. Others warned such a move against a retired man could destabilize trust in the system. Marcus waited silently, watching reactions. After the meeting, as he left with Edward's file, he noticed a small note on the cover reading, "Is it enough?" That question echoed not just for Marcus, but for the system, testing if anyone still had the strength to challenge it. Early one morning, a thick brown envelope was quietly placed in front of Mia Carter's house. There was no sender's name or clear address, only a folded note stuck on the outside read, "This is the part they don't want you to see." Mia stood still, coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the message as if waiting for a signal from her intuition. Inside was a USB drive, carefully wrapped in silver tape, and a short handwritten note, original, unedited. That noon, Mia and an independent technician examined the video. It was over 3 minutes long, nearly a minute and a half longer than the broadcast version. Midway through was a brief, almost unnoticed 3-second silence, containing a glance and hand gesture captured by a secondary camera used for audio support. Mia rewound this segment at least 10 times. The footage was from the third row on the right side of the courtroom, slightly tilted. It showed Daniel Brooks stepping to the stand, but pausing to glance at a casually dressed man in the front row. The man nodded lightly, then touched his right wrist, a subtle, deliberate signal. This was no coincidence. For those trained internally, the gesture was a covert sign, permission to act if necessary. The judicial security system used coded signals for courtroom instability to avoid explicit orders. This video, at the perfect angle and time, captured what was removed from official records. Mia spent 2 more days confirming the motion's integrity with geometric experts. They matched the seating chart perfectly. The man nodding was Harold Veers, the judicial assistant who had denied any connection to Daniel during a prior hearing. On release day, Mia appeared on live TV, determined. Facing the screen, she said, "People say there was no sufficient evidence in the courtroom case. The truth is that evidence was edited. Here is the original video." The video played fully, without charts or commentary, only timestamps. At the moment Daniel received the signal, the studio fell silent. Then the footage fast-forwarded to Daniel touching his belt, stepping up, and the eyes, those eyes, making everything clearer than any excuse. Public reaction surged. Hashtags like "Nod Order" and "The Look That Acted" trended within 2 hours. Major networks replayed the video, and analyses confirmed this was the first direct evidence that courtroom violence was purposeful and directed. The prosecutor's office had no choice. A late statement confirmed Daniel Brooks would be retried within 5 days, facing new charges: deliberate assault under unlawful command. Harold Veers was also urgently summoned. In the newsroom, Mia watched silently. On screen, the moment Daniel looked up, then acted, repeated 5 times. Each replay revealed what files and testimony could not. Calm eyes of someone who thought they'd never be caught. But the camera recorded it, and the system behind that nod began to unravel. The prosecutor's office was split, some embarrassed, others rushed to manage a media crisis. Legal advisors reviewed document security, while prosecutors listed witnesses linked to the recorded signals. Focus shifted from Daniel's violence to the origin of that nod. Daniel's lawyer held a press conference, arguing the gesture was not a direct order and lacked verbal commands. The prosecution countered with internal training manuals defining that nod and wrist touch as a coded activate immediate response signal, legally valid if executed in court. Daniel was summoned for internal questioning. Asked about the signal moment, he replied, "I acted on security intuition." The answer was unconvincing, since video showed no threat when he drew his taser. Judge Violet was calm. No disruption in the courtroom. What intuition led to shocking the presiding judge without cause? Marcus watched developments with Violet, replaying the video at the nod moment. Violet said nothing but nodded slightly when Marcus said, "That nod here is stronger than any signed order." She added, "And those eyes are the confession he never expected to be recorded." That night, the Judicial Oversight Committee held an emergency meeting. voting to transfer the case to federal criminal investigators, adding conspiracy to commit organized violence. Harold Veers was identified and immediately summoned to explain his role in censoring media and links to senior courtroom staff. As Marcus predicted, the evidence triggered a review of many support coordinators in trials. Dozens of sealed cases were reopened, especially those delayed for lack of evidence, but with edited videos. Social media buzzed, this time about how the system created safe zones for underground power. An anonymous comment became a headline. They don't need orders, they just glance. But this time, the camera looked back. Marcus read this late at night, sitting quietly as the video played. This time, the system couldn't cut the footage. That silent glance had finally spoken. This morning's courtroom was fuller than any previous session. The audience seats filled early with journalists, lawyers, justice watchdog representatives, and others without tickets, standing in hallways just to witness the end of a long-standing abuse of power. At the top row, the panel of 3 judges remained unchanged. Violet Johnson sat center, hands resting on the dark wooden table, expressionless, but with a gaze deeper than any morning oath. Daniel Brooke entered wearing his pale gray prison uniform. 2 officers led him to the defendant's seat, then stepped back, leaving just enough space between him and the rest of the room. Without the tense police uniform or taser belt, Daniel sat upright, eyes fixed ahead. He neither sought support from his lawyer nor glanced at familiar faces or union representatives. Everything was clear. The prosecutor rose, hands empty, voice steady and direct. Defendant Daniel Brooke is charged with assaulting a law enforcement officer within a judicial setting with organized and intentional nature. This act followed an internal coded signal, proving it was part of a covert coordination system, not an individual reaction. Based on video evidence, witness statements, and behavior comparison, the prosecution requests the maximum penalty under current law. The indictment was brief and firm, implying no need for further proof. No lengthy explanation of social consequences or moral messages followed. This was the final trial, and all facts had been laid out. The defense lawyer stood next, not to dispute legal points, but to recount Daniel's service. The defendant was once a distinguished officer, deployed for many years in frontline units, involved in numerous security interventions. Yet even this carried little weight, as Daniel himself had not requested leniency. From the start, he remained silent. No defense, no cooperation, no final words. When Judge Violet asked, "Do you have anything to say before sentencing?" Daniel looked up and met her eyes. There was no confrontation or disdain, only a resolute look of someone at the end of a path with no turns left. Daniel said nothing, holding silence as his final control. Violet nodded and read the verdict slowly and clearly. Daniel Brooke was sentenced to 15 years in prison without parole, on 3 counts: violent conduct against an officer, abuse of power damaging judicial structure, and engaging in unlawful coordinated acts. The court also recommended the Federal Justice Office launch an independent investigation into cover-ups, report manipulations, and illegal interference in judicial censorship over the past decade. No applause or movement followed. The room was still, seemingly locked by the verdict's last words. No pardon. Daniel rose when called, escorted toward the rear exit where the lights were dimmer. Passing the judge's area, his eyes paused on Violet. No words passed. This silence no longer carried power. It marked a privilege lost, the right to stand above the law. The courtroom door closed behind him. His eyes, once sharp and mocking, now drifted over familiar faces before lowering, as if seeing for the first time his true place. Violet remained seated, hands lightly clasped on the table. Their eyes met once more. No confrontation, no warning, just the silence of 2 people knowing something irreversible had ended. A hush fell. No one moved or spoke. It felt like waiting for what might come next, as if the verdict wasn't the final act. Minutes later, a Federal Justice Committee representative stepped to the press podium with an official announcement. Operation B Point. The statement declared, starting next week, An interagency task force will review all trials involving law enforcement internal interference over the past 10 years. The focus includes evidence censorship, deliberate staffing, and unofficial orders affecting legal processes. For the first time, a federal legal body publicly admitted the enforcement system might have been internally manipulated with untraceable tools. Hours later, Marcus Reed received a direct call from the federal investigation chief, inviting him to join the task force as a legal advisor. Marcus paused before replying, "I don't want a title. I want authority to open every file. If I find tampered recordings, I want originals. If emails are deleted, I want restoration orders. If you agree, I accept." The next morning, all major news began with footage outside the courthouse. Violet Johnson, walking between two lines of people, needing no guidance or camera intrusion. Young officers who attended her training stood and watched her pass. At the corridor's end, a 10-year-old boy clutching a bread bag raised his hand in greeting. No one told him to. No one told him to bow. Violet paused, looked at the boy, then nodded. Slow, sure, without drama. She said nothing. In that moment, no one thought of titles, authority, or verdicts. That woman, with quiet steadfastness, made an entire room listen. Outside, where nods once signaled abuse of power, a new nod echoed. The sound of justice, not through argument, but unaltered action. The courthouse front yard was set up simply, a wooden platform draped in black fabric with plain gray carpeting. No flags, no banners, only a row of short chairs facing a quietly gathering crowd coming from all directions. The event was quickly organized by human rights groups and independent news agencies. There were no singers, hosts, or shows. People came not to be entertained, but to listen, believing that after the recent trial, something long awaited would finally be spoken. The first speaker was a former police internal auditor dismissed for exposing report manipulations. Then, the mother of a black teenager killed in a case of mistaken identity shared her story. Each speaker was brief but showed that everyone here knew the phrase, justice. When Violet Johnson took the stage, no one introduced her. She appeared quietly, wearing a gray-blue suit and white shirt collar, eyes fixed ahead, walking steadily. No applause. The crowd was silent, as if afraid a noise might make her turn back. Given the microphone, she held it in her left hand, her right behind her back, standing upright, waiting for the breeze to settle before speaking. "I've been asked how it feels to win a trial," she said calmly. "I have no answer. Justice is not a chair to sit in. It's how we stand, even when no one stands with us." Eyes began to glisten. Violet shared a story. "The first year as a judge, I refused to sign a pre-written verdict. I was told I didn't understand how things worked. Weeks later, I was reassigned to a low-level civil courtroom. Sitting alone for 3 years, I thought I'd lost." She paused, scanning the crowd, locking eyes with those in the front row. "But losing doesn't mean losing your seat. Losing means quietly sitting in the wrong seat. From that moment, I stood up." The microphone vibrated slightly in the breeze. Some nodded softly. Others held hands tightly. She spoke no more of the case or verdict. Everyone knew. What they needed was confirmation. "I don't represent perfection," she continued. "I've been silent when I shouldn't, hesitant when I should have stepped forward. If anyone believes justice lives only in the law, they've forgotten. Laws are written by people. Justice is what people hold in their hearts when they stand." She lowered the microphone. No applause. Some wiped tears, many stood but didn't move. Violet bowed lightly, a habit of final silence, and left the platform. Then, a middle-aged woman slowly stood, a face familiar from a wrongful arrest 7 years earlier. She said nothing, only stood tall. A man followed, a former officer who resigned, refusing to falsify reports. Others rose, forming a line. The crowd stood without slogans or banners. Their silence was solidarity. Violet didn't look back, but knew that was the first time she walked away unescorted. Others had stood up. Justice began that moment. The platform was folded away. The crowd stayed standing as if the story shouldn't end. Violet stepped down quietly, her soft shoes touching stone. She didn't turn or walk with security, stepping straight between two rows of standing people. No one called her name or applauded. Each step seemed to carve a path through silence that had waited too long. Eyes did not rest on her badge, but on the woman herself, as if seeing something once strangled, now returned by ordinary feet. Nearby stood a technician, suspended years ago for refusing to violate procedures, beside a gray-haired woman who had quietly recorded courtroom disputes unnoticed. Mia Carter held a camera but didn't film. What mattered was in her mind. A young man in plain clothes, once cut off during a broadcast about mismanagement, stood silently. They didn't approach to thank, but stood, their presence a declaration that the past had been heard and not silenced again. In a corner near an old power station, Marcus Reed leaned against an iron post, arms crossed, watching Violet's silhouette. In his hand was the federal investigation map marked with red dots. He folded it, wiped sweat from his forehead, and his eyes held a tension that didn't fade. Justice had been symbolically reshaped. But people like Daniel Brooke were not the end. They were the first mask in a longer, deeper struggle. As Violet passed the third row, a boy about 8 slipped from his mother's side, holding a wilted white flower. He raised it silently. Violet paused, but didn't immediately take it. She bent slightly, meeting the boy's wide eyes. No emotion, no tears, just the crossing of two moments. One who nearly couldn't stand, one never taught to stand tall. She took the flower, nodded, and continued. No one moved. No music played. The scene was still as an unshuttered photograph. The woman, holding a wrinkled flower, walked among rows who did not bow, in a city once thought to have no one strong enough to stand. For the first time in many years, silence was no longer fear but affirmation, something reclaimed, not with banners, but by standing together on the right side. Have you ever been misjudged simply because someone didn't understand who you really are? Have you ever been underestimated, only to quietly prove you were far more capable than they ever imagined? If this story made you reflect, share it, because too many people still believe silence equals weakness. The truth may be buried, but courage always finds a way to rise. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories about justice, resilience, and what it truly means to rise where no one thought you could.